Well, hello and welcome again to a January frosty, cold, well, for us anyway, not for our guest, edition of Desert Island Drams. You're on Whisky and Cynicism. My name's Simon Smith. Thanks for tuning in yet again. I'm really thrilled to see an old friend of mine here. It's, someone who I worked with closely when I was in Australia a few years back, and someone who's huge in the Australian whisky scene, heading up the Scotch Malt Whisky Society chapter out there. It's Mr. Matt Bailey. So Matt, firstly, welcome along, mate. And how are you? What are you? Excuse me. What are you drinking?
Simon, good to see you. Yeah, I've just poured myself a core range whiskey, which for someone who works in independent bottlings might seem a bit out of brand. But I've just poured myself a Dalwhinnie 15 to warm up on, if you like. And we were just having a quick chat about how you often don't get to fully appreciate how good sometimes single casks and independent bottlings can be unless you sometimes take a moment to reset your palate, go back to some of the core range whiskeys that you know and love, and remember why you first fell in love with whiskey. So I'm going with Dalwhinnie 15, the gentle spirit, as they like to call it, to kick off with.
No, so I should cover that in a piece just this week about what is bad whiskey, on the blog, and talk about, we often ignore whiskeys simply because of familiarity. And I think to our detriment more than anything. And I guess and I work in wholesale normally, and you're working for an independent bottler. I guess you're a bit like me. You don't really have a brand. You've got your bottler's brand, but you have the freedom to move through distilleries a lot, don't you?
Yeah. And that's exciting. I mean, I've often wondered what I would be like as a brand ambassador in the traditional sense, because it's kind of like that would be representing one whiskey that you get to talk about all the time. There's pros and cons to that, I'm sure. But of course, I think for me, moving through all those distilleries from, in our case, distillery number 1 to distillery number 149, which we're up to now, is kind of exciting because it presents, a chance to try so many different regionalities and styles and casks and distillates. And that's why, because of that diversity, having an opportunity to go back every so often and try something like I'm doing at the moment, palate resetting, I like to call it, and remembering, those kind of whiskeys that made you go, oh, that's why I love whiskey. And I think your point about, bad whiskies are kind of a funny phrase in itself, isn't it? It's like what's bad to you is going to be great to someone else, and vice versa. So
absolutely, yeah. Too often the word bad gets thrown around as fact when it's merely opinion. So I guess to onto that, as I say, I work in wholesale and a company that normally I do, and a company that also has a retail arm, both online and physical. We get certain releases here in the UK that we see, we go, right, that's going to sell out in minutes. That's going to hit the website. It's going to be like, whew.
Oh yeah.
No, it's going to be impossible to get, and you'll know the ones kind of, especially for OBs, Ardbeg single casks, or, anything heavily sherried, really dark, all that kind of thing. You're an independent bottler and also to an Australian market, what kind of specs on casks, or what kind of bottlings do you see coming in an outturn and go, right, that's going to be the blockbuster in this outturn?
It's often aged whiskey does that trick to people. Like, we see a steady flow of great sort of 8 to 17-year-old casks quite a bit, which is great in that age bracket. And then we see a bit more in the sort of the 18 to 22-year-old whiskeys. But every time we get a whiskey that's sort of that 25, 30, 35, 38-year-old kind of cask, we know that there's going to be a certain rush for that kind of whiskey. But I think more so than age statement, because I think if just going to your point on the Australian market, I think Australian whiskey drinkers as a whole, the education level has been getting better and better, like it would in any territory, of course. But I think so much more so that that sort of 90s marketing, that age statement is everything, has sort of really taken a back seat to what's interesting about that spirit and that cask and that release. And I think that's kind of more interesting as a discussion point, talking around flavor rather than talking about around brand. But going back to your question, it's like there are some whiskeys that, of course, if you see something like a sherried whiskey from Islay, if you see something like a single cask in that sort of realm, but of course, certain distilleries, as you know, as you mentioned, Ardbeg, I'd double down and say Bamore equally so. From, you start to see single casks of Bamore, people start to go a bit gaga. But it's the same with, even some New World whiskeys, and I don't really lump Japan into that anymore, but Japanese single casks, of course, are quite desired and things like that. But it's quite funny what you desire. I think for a lot of people in their whiskey journey, what they desire often doesn't match up with what is what they prefer to drink. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Chasing things based on a label or a number, regardless of what you
Yeah.
actually will enjoy. I mean, it must be very hard because the aged whiskies conversation must be difficult in Australia because obviously everything produced locally is going to be exceptionally young by comparison, and also over oaked and possibly ruined if it gets too old, depending on where it's being aged, I guess. But talking about 22-year-old Australian whiskey, and I've probably tried a couple around that age over my time, and it's not pleasant. So there must be an inherent kind of acknowledgement that older isn't always better.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to put too fine a point on it, but I think Australian whiskey in that respect gets a fair hall pass on that kind of discussion, if you like. And it's more that a lot of it is revolves around the personalities of Australian whiskey, and rather than the whiskey itself. And that's again has its pros and cons. Like when people talk about Lark, for instance, they're often talking about Bill Lark, and they're often talking about the personalities and the people behind it, and Craig Johnson and Chris Thompson, all those people, which is part of that discussion, I guess, for many people. But the age statement discussion doesn't really sort of come into it too much, no. And I recently tasted a 11-year-old Australian whiskey that was like well over the hill. And it's like it's been sitting in a cask, a 100-liter cask for 11 years. And it's like, 11 years would be a very acceptable age statement on a Scotch whiskey, as you know, but a very not very acceptable in Australian whiskey. And this was a single cask that, as viewers in the UK might know, the evaporative rate of alcohol versus water. We lose more water than alcohol in Australia. So therefore, the proof on that 11-year-old cask was 72, 73% ABV, because it had just kept climbing over the years. And it's like, then it just tastes like licking a hot fence post, and it's not very fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That kind of climate, I think at times, I mean, I once tried a 17-year-old New Zealand, okay, Kiwi whiskey that had been red wine cast the whole time.
Yes, I think I know the exact release you're referencing.
Yeah, I've forgotten was it Willowbank? The distillery?
Yeah, New Zealand Whiskey Company, or was it? Yeah,
yeah. And yeah, tannic, red wine, over oaked. I mean, it kind of can't, it just can't last that long in that kind of climate. But I guess that puts a little bit more pressure on Australian makers. With discussions you have, does that ever come up that it's like we can't just simply leave it longer and hope it gets better? I guess a finite time where they're working in. Is that part of the thinking from Australian distillers, to your experience?
I mean, a lot of them are. It's still. I still think we're in that sort of. I still like to think we're in that post 2014 era of Australian whiskey at the moment, which is where there's a huge rush to market and people are actually discovering that Australian whiskey is being made, and that sort of that next step has already been established. And what I mean by that is, like, pre 2014, people would ask me at tastings that I was hosting. They'd say, "Oh, do they even make whiskey in Australia?" And I'd have to say, "Oh yeah, there's like 22 distilleries in Australia." And they're, "Oh really? Wow." It's like I had no idea. And then post 2014, I say 2014 because of the year that Sullivan's Cove won the world's best whiskey for their French oak single cask. After 2014, that really put Australian whiskey and Tasmanian whiskey on the map. It sort of turned into this. People know it's made here now, and then you tell them there's 270 something distilleries in Australia, and they're like, "Oh, what? We thought there was like 10." It's like, no, it's closer to 200 and something now. I can't keep track. I can't keep track of that number, and I have no idea what the actual number is. Just so in case anyone's fact checking how many distilleries there are, and I've said, but I don't think it's part of the age statement thing. Isn't really. I mean, a lot of them are releasing whiskey at 2 years old, and it's 2 years minimum oak in Australia versus 3 in Scotland, and so there's that. There's a lot of young 2.5, 3.5-year-old whiskey here. Some of it works really well, some of it doesn't, and that's the. I think we're still in a very steep learning curve over here as to what makes great spirit.
Yeah, I guess if you get to 3 years old and it's not come to fruition yet, you start panicking because you haven't got that much longer where you can leave it before it gets a bit weird.
What I really want to see is distillers start putting stuff in like minimum 300-liter casks, and just start putting stuff in 300 and 500-liter casks and waiting 7 years. Now, I know that's obviously, I can hear all the accountants in the world going, "Well, what are we going to do for 7 years?" But like, it really is like, it's a tricky one. And that's why I don't mind them coming to market with 20 and 50 and 100-liter casks. But The industry is maturing, and there are a lot of distilleries now filling into 225s and 200s and 300s. So it is changing. It's changing very fast, especially for the bigger distilleries.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, surely kind of some kind of refill bigger casks might lead to some spirit being able to actually develop for a bit longer. And, you know, we might be able to see an Australian whiskey that's had a bit of time to integrate and sit down for more than a few years. With, I guess, because I mean, Australian whiskey in general, I guess, would see itself as relatively progressive, you know, and a bit kind of, and definitely a new world. I mean, I hate those terms, but, you know, of a new guard of distilleries. You now have more distilleries in Australia than in Scotland. And a lot of people who probably think they're taking whiskey to kind of brave new places, as it were. Do you find working from kind of an old world company perspective, is the society sometimes seen as like a bit old hat by Australian producers, or is it more, is it kind of a respect to the establishment of Scotch whiskey? Is it one or the other, or a bit of both?
It's a really good question. It's a bit of both. I mean, it's the Scotch Malt Whisky Society could be seen by some as a bit old hat. I don't see it as that, and I know most of our members don't. But I just it really is that the two things I want to make reference to on that is that the society is not your traditional independent bottler by any means. It's much more part of the industry, integral to it, and part of rather than at the periphery of. And that's something that's really important to us, in that working closely with distillers, with producers, with distilleries in general, on sourcing and procuring great spirit and casks, and then taking the efforts to mature ourselves and extra mature ourselves and finish ourselves and all that kind of stuff is really part of the spirit program, rather than it being sort of what can we get our hands on, and like I call a scattergun approach for some indies, where it might be sort of what can we buy and quickly let's bottle it all. I mean, we still have a massive sort of reject rate of casks each year, of casks that don't pass our tasting panel. So that's part of the process of running a whiskey club, that we have to bottle what we want to bottle is the best. But I think, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but the other side of the coin is that we are bottling a lot of spirit now from America, from India, from England, from Wales, from Japan, from Taiwan, Sweden, Denmark, distilleries all over now that we work closely with and collaborate with on a very sort of personal level, rather than, you know, quick, what have you got and what can we use? And I think that's a much more considered approach to, as you say, lack of phrasing, but new world versus old world in that approach. I mean, it's growing, but it's not at the expense of any other.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting thing when you do see. I mean, I work with some very, very small independent bottlers over here, and you can see the care, you can see the time, you can see kind of, you know, there's no drop of liquid going into any bottle that hasn't been checked and checked again and approved by, you know, everyone. And then there are others where they come to market and they're not that they seem thoughtless, but you're absolutely right. It's just like, well, that's a bottle of whiskey that we managed to put out.
That's right, and it's very much for them. It's just a commercial decision. There's something that our head of whiskey once told me recently, even just recently, that our tasting panel have no commercial incentive to bottle. They don't go, well, we have to bottle this many casks per month or this many casks per year. They just they go by what actually tastes good, passes the tasting panel, which has all that research behind it from the SWRI, and is actually worth bottling for our members. And that separates us from being an independent bottler to being a whiskey club. Now, I think that's one of the key differences here that is worth remarking on anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess with you know, an inherent subscription, then you've got a captive audience, and you don't need to kind of think about the volume that's going to it or not, I guess.
I mean, every branch, all of our branches around the world, I think is 22 or something like that, all clamor for allocations of casks so they can, you know, share them for their members around the world, and that's what the fun is.
Yeah, allocation being one of those words in Scotch whiskey that makes me absolutely shiver these days, because everyone has allocation of absolutely everything.
Yeah. Johnny Walker Black Label now on allocation.
I'm sure we'll see the day. One question I was going to ask you, and I just realized I don't think I really gave you a heads up on it, so feel free to take a minute. But what I normally ask people is, we all have kind of weird and wonderful stories and kind of memories from being in the drinks industry. You know, kind of when we realize we're in a position that's very special, very surreal sometimes and very interesting, simply because we are working with booze and we would not be there otherwise. Do you have a favorite memory in your time with the society that you kind of stood in front of a group of people or at a place or in a certain situation?
Yeah.
This is spectacular and I'm only here because of whiskey.
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, you didn't preload me with that one. So I'll have to.
I normally do. So apologies for that.
No, that's all right. Actually, I mean, there is one that immediately sticks out for me. But there's a secondary one that I'll just remark on as well. The first one really was in 2019. Each year outside of international flights being a problem, but each year the Scotch Malt Whisky Society would host their brand and branch, they called it, which is where they bring in all the global ambassadors from around the world, myself and China and European ambassadors and New Zealand, whatnot, all coming together in Scotland for 3 or 4 days of intensive meetings and catch-ups and looking at new products, looking at what's going on, what's coming up in the year ahead. That same year, though, in 2019, I was going to be there for Brand and Branch, but also for Facial. And I thought, well, that's very cool. I hope to make it over to Isla. And it wasn't just making it over to Isla for Facial. It was also Helen Stewart. Big shout out to Helen over on our marketing team in the UK. She said, would you like to host the SMWS Old and Rare tasting in Isla House? And I was like, yeah, like that's absurd. Like that's just such an opportunity. Like they could get so many ambassadors or actual Scots to do this kind of work. And I was like, but I'm over there. And they said, do you want to host, the Facial Old and Rare? And they gave me 6 bottles of SMWS single casks, all of them bar 2 from like yesteryear. So like 10.6 and 53.5 and like casks from the 1970s and including 2 very rare modern releases, which was a really old 23 and a really old 29. So I'm sure I can say the names here, Brook Laddie and Lefroy, and they gave us 1 cask of each and we worked around those. And I hosted to a room of, I think about 44 people. And we tasted all the whiskeys from those bottles. And I still to this day, I don't even know if half of them could understand me because I know there were guests from all over Europe and China and people like who had come in internationally to go to that tasting that I was asked to host. So I'm standing in Isla House surrounded by, Isla House. It's a beautiful building and it's surrounded by taxidermy and antiques and paintings and just the history of that room and being asked to host in that room is quite an honor. Of course, being my luck, I had a completely blocked sinus that day. And so I had to sort of stand up front and go, doesn't that smell incredible? I couldn't smell a thing. All I could smell was the drugs that I'd picked up in Campbelltown the day earlier. But that as well as just being the opportunity to meet and even not necessarily work with in some cases, but just being able to meet people who I consider idols or people who I consider, true like pioneers of the industry who are either in Scotland or in Australia, and just being able to sort of sit with them and pick their brain a bit and just have a chat with them about things, which is always great. Like I've, had the chance to meet people like Jim McEwen and Dr. Bill Lumsden and people like that over the years, and Rachel Barry and people like that who you meet and go, what an amazing person. I'm so lucky to have met that person and talk with them. And it's just, and just by the way, the whiskey industry is, I still think that the friendliest group of people internationally. Really, it's such a community. And I came from the music industry before, and that's fairly cutthroat in comparison. It's fairly sort of backstabbing and cutthroat this, and it's all a bit sort of rough and tumble. And whereas I find the whiskey industry, it's such a fantastic family and community that even if you are talking to someone who you directly compete with or whatever, it's like you're like, we all get along. It's like we're all here for a common goal to share good whiskey. So let's not fight about it. And the fighting about it doesn't help anyone anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. The kind of the communal nature of the whiskey industry never ceases to amaze me. There's a couple of things on that. Firstly, I think of everyone I've had on, I think this would be episode number 22, maybe, or somewhere up there. Face Shield 2019 has been mentioned at least 4 times for people's favorite memory now, as that particular year seems to come up time and time again.
Well, you and I actually bumped into each other at Lagavulin at Face 2019, if you recall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because
You were with Ross Blaney, and we bumped into each other at Lagavulin, and we didn't talk long because it was pissing down with rain, and we're standing outside being like, "Hey, what are we doing here? Look at this!" And then, we caught the ferry back. Well, I mean, we caught the ferry back, and you sort of came along for the ride. Let's put it that way.
yeah, I slept on the ferry back, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for anyone from the West Coast listening, when Matt said there that he picked up some drugs in Campbelltown, he definitely meant for his sinuses, not.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I definitely like. I found a little pharmacy in Campbelltown, which was all this sinus relief stuff. And this pharmacy, by the way, was straight out of 1950s Australia. It was like a very old school pharmacy where everything's just sitting on the shelf and people don't pinch stuff, obviously, rather than a modern pharmacy that you see these days where everything's behind perspex and I don't know.
Yeah. Campbelltown's famous for two things. One of them is whiskey. The other one is drugs of the illegal description. So.
Oh, right. Okay.
There'll be a lot of people on the West Coast who would have heard that line about picking up drugs in Campbelltown and thought, "You're surprised you didn't get stopped on the way back down the A82."
Who said I didn't?
So I guess on the flip side of things, as we kind of talk about favorite things and good things in the industry, but is there something in particular that annoys you most about the industry? Something that you've got a bugbear with the whiskey and/or drinks industry?
Yeah. I mean, there's things that annoy me, but they're often like, they're often sort of like a gnat or a flea in size in comparison to the good things. I mean, sometimes, things that annoy me. There's going to be things where, I think for me, like one of the things is when you have sometimes, that trick when you're presenting to a room of people and you're reading the room, you're sort of getting a vibe of the room of who's in there, and you're sort of looking at 40, 80, 120 strangers. But depending on how you sort of craft that presentation and how you read the room, they go from strangers to good friends within sort of about 5 minutes. And it becomes a lovely experience. Sometimes that connection just doesn't work. And sometimes you get some obnoxious people who are just there to get drunk. And that's going to be the case of anywhere you work in the drinks industry, whether it be a fancy wine tasting or a beer tasting or whatever. It's going to be something like that where that happens. And sometimes you do get a few buffheads at festivals who, I like to call it the outstretched hand that you get at whiskey festivals over the table. And it becomes I say that now, but I am missing whiskey festivals from all this COVID stuff. We're all missing them now. But if you look back, things like that. And also just, like I say, you do see a little bit of sort of, I don't know, a bit of bad practice, let's just say, within some areas of both wholesale and retail, as I call it, a bit of bad practice where a bit of gouging going on, a bit of sort of flipping going on and things like that sometimes that you go, really, that's just kind of the ugly side of it for me. I mean, I'm one of those people that I buy a bottle with the intention of opening and enjoying it and sharing it around with as many people as possible. And it's like, and sometimes you see just this endless sort of cycle. I've got this theory. That some bottles don't actually exist. They're just there for circulation on auction markets. And no one's actually ever seen it because the winner just relists it to make their next flip on it and over and over. I don't know.
We're selling pictures of bottles. People.
You may as well. You may as well just sell the artwork of the bottle because you may as well. So, I mean, that's kind of one of my gripes is just that whole sort of, there is a grubby side to that side of it. But if you take yourself out of that completely, if you remove yourself from it mentally, you can have a good time.
Yeah. I mean, we see it a lot, where I work. We'll release something online that'd be limited or whatever, and someone will sweep in and pick up a big load of it. Oh, that's decent. That's, a rare release. It's, a good price, and someone picks up quite a few, and you're like, damn, so that's a decent sale. And then their shipping address they'll ship it directly to an auction house. They'll
see, that's just disappointing.
Yeah, at which point their order does get immediately cancelled at that point, and they get refunded. Because we don't want to support it, but it's like, come on, man! Like, you're not even going to see the bottle. You're absolutely right. Literally, not even going to see it. You're just trying to flip it, and you just feel producers out there who are producing a bottle of whiskey. They're trying to price it fairly at 50 to 100 quid, and then those very producers will be seeing it going for 4 or 5 times that on an auction the next week, and eventually these producers are going to go, well, sod it. We're just going to sell it for that much in the first place, and then you and I, the whiskey drinkers, are absolutely screwed.
That's right, and I think that's the part of it that does get a bit grubby. And there's a concerted effort happening at the SMWS to start stamping out that kind of practice, especially for our older and rarer stocks. We are working on a system there, which will be revealed later this year, which is exciting. But I mean, it's a perfect example was last year, actually. There was a bottling we got in, which was quite a rare bottling. And I think we got like 12 in the country or something. And UK got a few cases, and US and whatnot. But it was quite a rare new release from us. We were going to price it locally at about $500 a bottle. Now, I mean, that's by your lingo, that's 240, 250 pounds or something. It's a rare bottle. It was quite desirable. We was by the time the stock landed in Australia from our sea freight from the UK, it was like we were sitting at an auction sites going for £1,800. And you go, so we're going to release this, and it's going to vanish because I mean, and we didn't raise the price on it. It's still sold at the same price, but we're not interested in that playing that game. But it's kind of like, it's just frustrating because you see this stuff and it's like, well, people are going to research it. They're going to go, oh, okay, I'm going to get that, and it's going to be flipped. It could be, but it's just frustrating to see that happen when you're, and as you say, the producers see their bottles go, and especially in Scotland. I mean, you guys have had a whole lot of newer distilleries, even some of them which I probably can't even say right, but like the Nicknian and the Ballandalloch and Ardnamurchan and all these distilleries that are popping up.
Oh God, the wonderful Ardnamurchan as well. Who, I mean, they put that release out at, it was 45 quid retail or something. I mean, people would have paid 200 quid for that retail, no bother. Yeah. They put it at a fair price. Unfortunately, I've not seen it. I think I've seen it go for 125 at auction is the most, which is still, I mean, it's still, 3 times just about what someone paid for it. But, I mean, it's one of those things as a producer, especially for a smaller producer, you must be heartbroken. Imagine if, someone paid you 50 quid to go and do a presentation. Like, cool, 50 quid, thanks very much, man. And that person then recorded it and sold the recording online for 200 quid. You'd be like, well, that's
I actually did have someone. There was someone at a tasting in Sydney about 2 years ago who was doing this with his phone the whole time I was presenting, and he was recording it.
Yeah, it's not distracting at all. Yeah,
I was I was a bit distracted at first, but I was like, you know what? I might get tagged on Instagram or something, so whatever. And then I found it on YouTube like 2 days later, and I was like, but it didn't even mean anything to anyone else apart from the people in that room.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like, and I mean, 2 days later, I mean, it'd be 30 or 40 people watched it or something. And I was like, it's like, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to send a message or write a comment, but I was just like, why would you're not drinking the same drams as we're having right now. So why is this exciting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's so strange. Speaking of drams, I'm really interested in this. So I think just a bit best for anyone watching out, because I know there's a few people who maybe aren't quite as immersed in the industry as we are. When Matt numbers, he might be able to explain it better, but basically, Matt, do you want to just go through the numbers you're mentioning, the code that it represents for the society?
Oh, the numbering system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we give it, instead of listing the distillery name on a bottle, we give it a code. So in this case, I'm holding 93.131, which is called Campfire Treats on the Beach. It was a 14-year-old oily and coastal Campbelltown whiskey, that one. We give it a code. So 93 means it's the 93rd distillery to join the society. And 131 means that's the 131st cask in 38 years to pass the tasting panel. And it's always bottled at cask strength, in this case, 59.8%. And it's a 14-year-old, and it's in the oily and coastal flavor profile. So we give it a flavor profile, a name, a tasting note, bit of fun, but it's bottled by the expert tasting panel, picked out by our whiskey team. And it's one of 182 bottles. So it's a single cask. And I think the conversation for us is always around flavor. It's always around talking about the flavor that you get from a whiskey and talking about what you're nosing and tasting, rather than this distillery this and this distillery that, and they were founded in this year. Those kind of stats are boring. They don't tell any story about what's in your glass. Like if I nose this and go, yeah, this distillery was definitely founded in 1816. They're like, it doesn't tell me anything about the whiskey. And by the way, I don't know what year Distillery 93 was founded. I'm sorry. So I'm making that number up just in case some of the mega nerds get me here.
I actually don't know what it is, but I think I can have a guess what it is. Probably got a bottle.
Well, there's 3 distilleries in Campbelltown, and
I know
it's not
exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of why. I mean, I completely agree that the conversation about flavor is so important. That's why I'm quite interested. So, 93.131. So I'm about to ask you your 3 desert island drams. Now, you work for a company that's had 131 casks of that particular distillery come through it. I'm sure you've not tried them all, but I'm sure you've tried a few. There must be a library somewhere that you've got through some of them. That distillery, that's what I'm thinking of, and I'm within 3 anyway. I probably tried maybe 10 releases from that distillery over the time, 15 if I'm lucky. So your drams, I'm really interested because you kind of work within the kind of this huge catalog of very specifically described as well whiskeys from 180 distilleries, did you say?
Yeah, something like that, 180, 185.
Cool. So I'm particularly interested in this. So what's your first of 3 desert island drams, Matt?
Oh, desert island drams. I mean, it's really tempting to pick out like a particular single cask, because then you can go, well, that was one of my all-time favorites, and therefore I would come back to it over and over. But that's kind of defeats the point of, I like to think that single casks from the society exist in a time and place, and you enjoy it when you open it and share it around, and when it's gone, it's gone. And that's often the case, because by the time it's gone, you go back to the website, there's none left. And it's like, well, that was okay. That was good fun. I enjoyed that one. There'll be another one from that flavor profile or that code coming up soon anyway. And if there isn't, there'll be something else. It's always about the journey. So picking out desert island drams is tricky because, look, honestly, okay. I'm going to go with, I'll pick one out anyway. I'll pick out 119.14 was the code on it. It was a Japanese whiskey distillery, and it was the 14th cask we'd ever seen from that distillery. And it was an 11-year-old first fill Bota Corta sherry cask. And I love my sherried whiskeys, but I tend towards ex-bourbon. I tend towards team refill. I tend towards refill bourbon characteristics. But if we're talking desert island drams, that has to be up there. I say I tend towards bourbon characteristics, but I'd honestly put probably first edition Black Bamore up there and as a desert island dram as well. I know that's predictable, but it's one of those whiskeys that you go, I'd always return to it. And the third one would have to be really just something, pick out something from, I mean, I've got a soft spot for Bruichladdich, and it's one of those distilleries for me that I always like to come back to and explore. So maybe something from Bruichladdich just to give me a bit of that sort of coastal, bit of that peat, bit of that sort of funkiness going on. So that way I've got, well, that gives me 2 Islers, doesn't it? And 1 Japanese. So there you go. Look, I know it's a bit of a strange list, but that's a really hard question, actually. That might be the hardest question yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously in the fortunate position where I don't have to think about it because I ask the questions. But when it comes to, I think people expect desert island drams to include some single casts, some really rare one-off releases. I mean, in all honesty, of all the single casts I've tried, there's few of them that stick in the memory. You're absolutely right. So time and place. You try a single cask of something, whether it be an indie or a release that comes by and it comes through the office and I get a taste, or it's behind a bar and I buy a shot or whatever it is, and you enjoy it. You think that's delicious, that's wonderful. But without returning to it, because as you say, they just go so quickly. Without returning to it, it's really difficult to lodge it in your mind as a possible desert island. Whereas something that you try really regularly, I mean, Johnny Walker Black, I think, is the most common desert island we've had. Because for a lot of people, it's something they go back to time and time again. It's always reliable, and they come to adore it. It's really hard to fall in love with a single cask.
It's easy to fall in love with it whilst you've got it.
Yeah, for a fleeting romance, possibly.
Yeah, it's a romance, and it's a time and place thing, and you taste so many single casks, and you go, yeah, that was fantastic. That was fantastic. That was fantastic. And it's like, but which one would you take to a desert island with you that you could consistently want to dig into? That's the trick. I think Black Label's a very good answer, actually. And I can see why that would be one of the more common ones. I have a bottle of a 1980s Blue Label on the shelf there's only like half of it left, but it's been kicking around for a little while. That's remarkable stuff. Obviously, this is we're talking late 80s, early 90s bottling of it. It's very much in that sort of post-whiskey downturn era. There would have been a lot of mature stock kicking around. I don't know what was blended into it. No one really would, but it was just one of those things where it's like the spirit in that, you can tell there's some old spirit in there, and that's fun.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable. So I'd take a single cask. I'd take something like a Society 27 or a 1 or a 3. Lots of codes that I want to look at, of course, but I'd take something that you can consistently enjoy and come back to over and over again like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think consistency is so key for these things. I mean, and you're preaching to the choir as far as old blends are concerned, because
I can see that
70s and 80s. I guess people are interested in the society. Obviously, to join it and whatnot is a very simple Google wherever you are, and if you are in the UK or Australia or anywhere else, to join a chapter. As well as there's quite an interesting book called The Founder's Tale, which I read recently, which is about whose name escapes me, the founder of the society.
Oh, Pip Hills, yeah, Philip Hills.
Which was kind of a look at single malt whiskey and coming to fruition and independent bottling and all that stuff. So it's worth picking that book up as well if anyone's kind of hearing Matt talk about society and is interested.
Yeah, it's like it's a $25 book. It's not expensive. It's just a fun novel, really. And Pip is quite a character. I was very lucky to meet him a couple of years ago, and he lives on another planet in a good way. Like, he's just like, his adventures and his stories. Some of them will just make your eyes pop out of your head. And this book is just a condensed version of sort of the history of how the society came about. And the stories within that book are quite fascinating about how he likes to remark about how he was going to distilleries. You've got to remember, let me just back up 1 second. You've got to remember the society was bottling not just single casks, but single malts from distilleries before the distilleries were, in many, many cases. So if you see something like a 30.1 in the wild, so the code 30 is Glenrothes. If you see a 30.1, that was the first ever Glenrothes single malt whiskey. So you go, that's really cool. So he was going into these distilleries, picking the eyes out of the stock, if you like, picking out some of the best casks and going, oh, can we have that one cask? And distilleries took 5 to 10 years before they worked out what he was doing. They were just like, yeah, I mean, what would you want that for? It's not, I mean, otherwise it'll just get blended, sure. Yeah. Like there wasn't even a conversation. It was like blending was king. We're talking 1982 here. It's like the blending was king. Why would you want that one cask? It's only one cask. It won't impact us at all. We're bottling 1,000 of them a week for blending. So why, it's like, cool. And I think looking back on that and going, I mean, some things change, obviously, and our relationships with distilleries has become much better over the years because, they know we're not listing the name. We're not competing with them on a brand level. We're just enjoying it as flavor goes and having a bit of fun with it. Pardon me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think,
I mean, there's stories that he talks about in the book are about that kind of era, about what, having to procure single casks out of distilleries and understanding what that meant then as well. Like,
I mean, so far ahead of its time, I guess. Yeah,
it's absurd. It's a different era entirely. And we look at it now and go, oh, yeah, single cask, single malt whiskey. Yeah, cask strength whiskey. Yeah, cool. That wasn't a thing. He was bottling cask strength whiskey in 1982. There was probably one other cask strength on the market. And I think we were beaten to the punch by Glenfarclas 105, perhaps, maybe back then. Yeah. But I mean, I'd have to check the years on that. I'm sorry. But it was unheard of. No one would drink it at that proof. Why would you want to drink a single malt, let alone a single cask? That's absurd. So, I mean, that's a cool part of that book is understanding how it all came about.
Yeah, and to put it into context, I think the first single cask release from an OB was Glenmorangie, which I think was 1992 maybe. And there's going to be someone at home, some nerd will probably get me on that. But
so the first single malt as an OB? Yeah,
first single cask, sorry.
Oh, okay. Look, yeah, I mean, you could be right. I always remember the 1963 Glenfiddich single malt example, but as a single cask, you could be right about Glenmorangie. But you say 1992, right?
So you're talking a 10-year delay between him doing it and an OB doing it.
Like he said in the book, like 5-10 years before anyone worked out what was going on. And then only then some distilleries started going, oh, okay, what if we release a single cask of our own whiskey?
Yeah. And now, of course, it's, as you say, not only common, but sought after.
I mean, people now know what they are for a start, which is a good start. But as you say, and also they're sought after. They are. It's like if you like the single cask expressions from distilleries, like they're I guess, a distilled characteristic, pardon the pun, but they're sort of an insight into that cask, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and as you say, very much a moment in time.
Yeah, a moment in history and a moment in time, and to see what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great talking to you. I mean, I think so much of what we've talked about on previous islands, as well as kind of in some of the blog posts on Whisky and System, has been about looking at whiskey as flavor. I'm kind of tasting blind. I mean, and I do a lot of blind tastings with friends, and all the bottles samples we exchange are always coded rather than names for that very reason.
I love it.
And while obviously the society's distillery numbers are the worst kept secret in whiskey, you can simply Google them and find them. The concept behind them is just that, so that you don't have any preconceptions as to what you're about to drink, and you should experience it simply as that, as the flavor and the palate that is right in front of you. And I think it's a great way to have something on the market like that still exists in that way. I mean, for me, I don't know the distillery characteristic, the distillery numbers, sorry, for the most part. If I pick up a bottle of society whiskey, I will be drinking it blind. I'll probably I'll look it up afterwards, but I've been drinking whiskey for a dozen years, and for me, it would still be a blind experience. I think it's great that exists out there, that you can pick a bottle off a bar shelf and have nothing before you put it to your lips.
Yeah, and that's kind of, what I always tell this to new members, especially. They always say, "Oh, where can I find out what the codes are?" And I mean, I could just reply, you can Google it. It's not our data, but it's the worst kept secret, as you know. But I actually, my response these days is, don't look it up, because the longer you can go without knowing them, the more fun you have. Because I remember having so much fun, especially in my early years at the society, not knowing the codes. And the less I knew about those codes, the better. It was like, not only did I not know the code, I'd like taste it and be like, I don't really care either, because knowing that name. I mean, let me put it in this context. The whiskey I've literally just poured is 72.89 Pirate's Breakfast Juice, which was a collaboration bottle with Whiskey and Almond. Great bar in Melbourne. Now, it's like, how many of you have tasted Distillery 72 before? Probably not many. It's not really a whiskey that has a core range single malt. And then you go, second phase is, how many of you had a ex-Guianese rum cask matured whiskey from that distillery? And it's like, probably never. So, you go, so what does the distillery character, what does the distillery name tell us about that whiskey? Like, next to nothing. And it's like when people ask, I'm sure if you're a Johnny Walker ambassador or something, people would often ask, oh, what distilleries go into gold or go into green or people know the green ones, but what goes into gold and what goes into blue? And they probably say, what difference does it make? Do you like it?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the same with this. It's like, what difference does it make what the distillery name is if the profile of what's been experimented with here by the tasting crew is so far removed from house style that it makes no sense anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but something that's you're not going to find anywhere else, then, as you say, it's just a number, and that's all it should be. And it should be enjoyed as such.
It's even just the other night, I was talking to Ewan Campbell, and who's our spirits director, and he was saying that spirits manager, sorry, and he was saying, there's a distillery they're working with in Scotland at the moment where they've procured, I think it was, a few thousand liters of a peated spirit rum from a distillery in Scotland, in Speyside, that's never done a peated run before. And it's like, so when we bottle those, they are going to be peated whiskies from a distillery code that no one's ever tasted peated whiskey from in years to come. And it's like, you go, so what difference does it mean to know that distillery code if what you're tasting is so far removed from what you'd find on a Dan Murphy's shelf, or in context of your viewers, on a Tesco shelf or something? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where you buy booze in the UK anymore. Sorry. Royal Mile or Master of Malt or whatever. It's like, there's
Royal Mile whiskies. Yeah, definitely.
Royal Mile whiskies, definitely. Yes, exactly. But that's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think it must be such a great tool for those on their whiskey to reverse engineer. If you've had 4 expressions from distillery number 28 and you really enjoy them, then it's worth finding out what that is, because then you can look out for other bottlings of that distillery because you obviously like it. The other way around, brilliant. But I mean, as you're right, it's having the fun of experiencing them without knowing that beforehand, I think is definitely the way to do it. And I think, especially, I've probably tried 300 blind whiskies this year, I think. through this small tasting club that I've got, which is basically just 4 idiots on Zoom once a week. But it's been really interesting to take all those things out. Because until I started working for Royal Mile 2 years ago, I probably would have tasted just about everything, knowing what it was.
Yeah, and that
is so different.
That paints the picture for what you end up following and tasting and exploring, rather than following your palate. And that's great to do blind tastings in that regard. On your point before about learning the code and then discovering what else that distillery has to offer, we occasionally bottle American spirits, and that includes like bourbons, rye, and American single malts. And there's a distillery that we work with in the US. Goes by the code of B3, I think. Anyway, it's Rocktown Distillery in Arkansas. They love the society so much, they've got a shrine to the SMWS in the distillery, like next to the stills. And because us bottling those single casks with them meant that it provided so much secondary exposure to that distillery. It was like, before we came along, it was kind of for them, I think a lot of it was like, well, how do we get the word out about this spirit? And it's like, no one had really heard of Rocktown. And it's like a very small distillery in Arkansas. It's bourbon coming out of Arkansas.
Yes.
Like, I mean, no one's even heard of Arkansas, let alone Rocktown. And it's like, everyone, you say the word bourbon, everyone's like, yeah, Kentucky and Tennessee. But this is another type of spirit entirely. And it's a fascinating insight into that spirit. But it's brought so much attention to their core range by having some single casks available.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of that's the role independent bottlers have played for years, is often exposing people to whiskeys that they wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, Craig Ellicky didn't exist until 2003, somewhere like that.
Probably something like that. I mean,
and it was exposure was through independence. People started enjoying the indie bottlings of it, so they brought in a core range, and that story has been told multiple times. So it's nice to hear that narrative's still playing out, and independents are bottling that. I think also, trivia for you, I'm pretty sure bourbon's the state spirit of Arkansas, but it's not the state spirit of Kentucky. That's a small bit of on that.
For the Kentucky trivia team that have tuned in, yeah.
Big fat whiskey quiz of the year 2019. I think we got that one wrong.
My entry must have got lost in the mail. Sorry.
Yeah. All right, Matt. I mean, it's been lovely to talk to you, and so good catching up. Thank you so much for your time. I really
of course, thank you.
Get some insight into the society as well, and kind of how it works, and especially for those who may not have come across them, or maybe seen the coded bottles on shelves and not really understood.
Yeah, sure. Just as something for your listeners, and when we broadcast this out to our members in Australia as well, if you want to if you're interested in joining the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and you are living in Australia and you want to expand your whiskey journey and palate, and the experiences and the events that we host as well are well worth joining for alone, let alone the bottlings. But if you want to join in on that, you can get $30 off your first year's membership by using Whiskey and Cynicism in the checkout. Just use the full code. Simon, do you mind me saying that? Is that okay? You can edit that out if you want. But and check out whiskeyandcynicism.com. It's awesome. And it's just, he's got a backlog of some awesome episodes that I've watched recently. So Simon, thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. So for anyone listening in Oz, and I know there are a few back home who do follow this quite closely, so there's a very, very generous deal from the society. And look, Matt, I mean, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. I don't know when I'm going to leave this flat again at this rate, to be honest. But hopefully, Face Shield's been cancelled again this year, but maybe next year you might make it over. And I'm obviously kind of desperate to. It's going to be about 4 or 5 years since I've been home by the time all this is over. So, I'll catch you for a dram this side of the world, all that soon enough.
Drinks are on me, mate. Drinks are on me, no matter when and where it is. Don't worry.
Look forward to it, buddy. Well, look, love you. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you so much.
Cup of coffee, but Slange Var, mate, and I'll catch you soon.
Slange Var. Thank you.